3 minutes if you would, Mr. Agnew.
I want to concentrate on the greening side of things because already farmers in the United Kingdom are taking decisions because of these proposals, and the decisions they're taking are damaging to the environment. These farmers have decided not to enter into environmental contracts with the government. We have a system in the UK where you can enter something called the elementary or the level scheme or a higher level environmental scheme. These run for 3 or 5 years and you sign a contract. They occupy land. What these farmers are so worried about is that if they sign up for another 3 or 4 years to one of these, this will be in addition to the 7% that you intend to set aside. Some very quick action is needed now, because if you don't act soon, these farmers will not sign up to these environmental agreements. I'm interested to see that organic farmers are excluded. If they can be excluded from these rules, why can't the leaf farmers or the higher level farmers? Why should the organic farmers have this privilege? Looking at the cropping side of things, I didn't think initially that this was going to be a big problem at home, because most people do farm more than 2 crops. However, anyone now farming under 500 acres or 200 hectares in the other language is quite likely to have all his arable crops dealt with by a contractor who is usually a large farmer himself. And that large farmer will insist, for reasons of efficiency, that these holdings are in 1 crop for 1 year. So the whole farm is in wheat 1 year, and then it's in rape for another year, and then perhaps in barley or something for another year. In order to comply, all these small farms are now going to have to split their farms into these different crops for each year. This means that when very large machines come in to do a job, they're not in the field for very long, and they're moving out somewhere else. This isn't efficient. There's a lot of fuel, etc., spent simply on the road. I hope that you will look at the threshold of where this starts to bite and raise it substantially up to, say, 500 acres, so that it only affects the very, very large farms. We're told that these greening measures are about climate change. In other words, if I take 7% of my farm out of production, it's going to improve the world's weather. It will certainly increase the world's hunger. Just to show I have been listening to the Spanish Agriculture Minister, she's worried about 50% co-funding from governments. I hope she realises that there are proposals to increase it to 85 or even 90 for Spain's neighbour, Portugal. The other thing I'm a little bit concerned about is the agricultural status of the countries that are going to hold the presidencies during this period, particularly Cyprus. I spent a few days in Cyprus last January. It's a very attractive country, a very well-organised tourist industry. In the space of driving several hundred miles, I only saw 2 tractors. That does not give me confidence that Cyprus has a really well-developed agricultural industry and is in a position to influence the industry, the agricultural industry in Great Britain. So, Minister in Cyprus, can you look me in the eye and say that your team is really up to it? Thank you.
Now, with regard to greening, here again we deal with the issue of simplicity and fair cross-compliance for farmers, as opposed to taking into consideration flexibility. And here, with the proposal that we have put on the table, we have tried to take into consideration that we're asking farmers to do a certain number of things so that they're actually acting on a common market throughout the European Union. These measures in the first pillar are complementary and do not exclude measures under the second pillar dealing with environmental issues. And that's why all the efforts that Mr. Agnew and all the contractual commitments that the farmers will have to undertake under the second pillar can also be reflected in what has been asked from farmers in the first pillar. If a farmer under the second pillar is paid to take a plot of land which he is going to where he's going to cultivate trees, or where he is going to have a set aside, Well, then that would be taken into consideration under the 7% that we have provided for greening, because it is that 7% which is an environmental component. We're not talking here about set-aside. We're not talking about having more set-aside. That's not the goal. But because some people said that there is waste with regard to food or how food is used, this is why we wanted to highlight that there's also sometimes waste with regard to how land is used. And that's why we want to stimulate the current direct payment system. And so this 7%, we want to try and draw back land which is not being used and bring it back into use for farming and to help farmers to maintain that land. Now,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do apologise for coming back in again. But I just wanted to give a reply to Mr. Agnew, if I could. He asked about Cyprus and so on. Put on your headphones, please, so you can hear. Thank you. I wanted just to reassure Mr. Agnew, looking at him, seeing the whites of his eyes, and saying that Cyprus will be only too able and willing to rise to the challenge of its presidency of Council. And I'm sure that we will have a successful tenure. Now, if I think that you've got to look carefully when you come to Cyprus. Mr. Agnew spotted 2 tractors. Perhaps there are not so many tractors in the seaside resorts, but believe me, going to the farming areas is well worth the trip. Thank you very much.
Grazie. E adesso...
Thank you very much. And now